shrimp on the Barbie? Down under?
That's why.
That's like that. It's like, oh.
Like my feelings.
Okay, today we're going to talk about special fasteners for aircraft. Okay, a few things to kind of think about. All of you have some exposure to installing conventional rivets in the shop. After all, that's what we deal with mostly in sheet metal work. You have to drill holes, install rivets, allow them or squeeze them, and then be done with it. However, you should be aware that there's a whole series of fasteners that are something other than that would be used in aircraft. In the general class, you had exposure also to common nuts, bolts, washers, everything else that might be used in an airplane. But there are some types of fasteners that are considered to be special one way or another. And what we're going to be talking about are those fasteners that usually are pulled or get some type of friction involved in them in their installation. Some of the special fasteners are what we call blind. What we mean by the term blind is they are installed from one side only. You realize when you install a nut or a bolt, you have to have access to both sides of the material for installation. In the case of blind fasteners, you only have to have access to one side for their installation. So there are some fasteners that we use for aircraft applications that you can install from one side only. Also, you should know that many of the special fasteners are considered to be what we call proprietary. They're manufactured by one manufacturer only, and they're used for a special type of application in the aircraft. And that leads to particular problems we'll kind of talk about too. Some of them are very expensive. In the case of like Cherry Max rivets, even the more common varieties of them that are mechanically locked type of fasteners, they run about $1.02 a piece. So you can compare that with a solid shank rivet that runs maybe about 3 cents. So they are relatively expensive. Many of them are also made out of specialty materials. Either they're made out of corrosion-resistant steel, or they're made out of titanium or other alloys that make them really pricey. So they're kind of expensive. You should know, too, that the FAA has some guidance information regarding those materials for fasteners. They restrict their use in some applications. You just can't use them because they're easy to use or convenient. You have to have specific approval from the airplane manufacturer in order to install them. So although they may be easy to use, unless you have some guidance material as there is in the service manual, your use is kind of prohibited in using them. Also note too, just because the manufacturer one airplane manufacturer installs them in a particular way, you may find that there are installation procedures that vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. For example, maybe a lock bolt that might be installed by Boeing is installed differently than the way it might be used on an Airbus aircraft. So different airframe manufacturers may have different techniques for installation, and they vary. Many of the special fasteners are designed with either a close tolerance fit or an interference fit as well. They don't expand at all when they're installed. So it requires precision drilling in order to make sure that the carry-through strength in the joint is present. So you can't have a sloppy fit on many of the types of installations. You have to use a reamer hole that's got to be gauged with a special type of gauging tool to ensure that the fastener adequately fills the hole. Otherwise, there's going to be very poor carry-through strength in the structure. So that's kind of what I can tell you. Something else that's kind of important too. This is a statement that's in your 4313. It says, The use of blind rivets has to be authorized by the airframe manufacturer. And this is pretty much the state for many of the special fasteners. Again, you just can't use them because you want to use them. You have to have specific approval by the airframe manufacturer that gives you guidance information on their use. So again, that's it. Hole preparation is really important for both blind rivets and blind bolts. And again, if you don't have a good fit between the hole and the fastener itself, you can anticipate that the fastener won't work very well. A lot of the clamping force, or at least the forces necessary to hold the joint together, depends on the interference that hole or a precision drill hole. This is important. I'm going to show you several different types of blind rivets that are used in installation. And again, they don't expand very much when they're installed. They don't swell. So again, if you've got a sloppily fit hole, you can bet the rivet's going to be loose in the hole. Also, many of these fasteners have locking collars. And if you select the wrong length of fastener when you install them, that the locking collar will never be inserted into the mandrel as the rivet is pulled. What that means is that the mandrel may sometimes be free to come loose and at the wrong time. So again, not only do you have to ensure that the hole is correct, but the actual fastener has to be sized appropriately for the thickness of the material. With the conventional rivets, I think you realize you can cut a rivet to the correct length. That's easy to do. But with these special fasteners, they usually work within a range of various thicknesses for probably the most common type of blind fastener you might find used in commercial use might be something like a pop rivet. Pop rivets are commercially used to attach things like modules. I think most of you have the idea of how they work. What we do is we put the pop rivet into a hole, and if you pull on the mandrel or stem of the pop rivet, the mandrel is pulled through the shank of the rivet and it slightly swells the shank. Pop rivets are not considered to be structural. In other words, they don't have enough internal strength after they've been pulled in order to give you sufficient strength to carry load. Do they have a purpose in aircraft construction? The answer is sometimes. If you had to assemble something of a temporary nature rather than just you might want to consider using pop rivets to kind of hold things and tack them together. But they really don't have any place structural on airplanes. Another place where they might be used maybe for like a map case or something that would be non-structural. It just has to be held together, but it doesn't take any type of load. So common pop rivets. Pop rivets are usually sized in specific grip ranges. When you go to Home Depot or Lowe's, usually you select them in grip ranges that are based on either short, medium, or long, depending upon the thicknesses of materials that you want to assemble. The diameters, usually there's only about 3 diameters that are available, 8, 32, and a 3/16 diameter. So what you do is you drill a hole, you deburr the hole, you put the pop rivet into the hole, and you pull on the stem. And what the stem does is pull through the sleeve of the rivet shank, swells the sleeve slightly, and then eventually breaks off. What you're left with, though, is pretty much just a hollow rivet after you're done. So again, there's really no shear strength involved in these things. And many of the aluminum varieties of them are made out of like 1100 or 3003 aluminum. So again, you're not going to get much strength out of these things. But again, they do in fact have a place. If you want to see the installation of a pop rivet in the shop tomorrow night, I'll pull one just to kind of show you how they work, but they're very easy to install. The innovation of the pop rivet, by the way, came from World War I in Scotland. It was United Shoe Manufacturing Company was really the innovator or the developer of the pop rivet, but it's now made by a lot of different companies, but USM was the original company that made it. There's a pop rivet pulling gun, and really what you do is you just put the correct head assembly into the gun, you put the stem of the pop rivet into the gun, and you start to squeeze, and what it is it pulls the mandrel through the stem or through the shank of the rivet. That's it, and eventually it breaks off. You can also use that pop rivet gun with an attaching tool. This is kind of interesting too. If you have to dimple a hole, there's a tool that you can insert into the pop rivet gun that what it does is it allows you to dimple sheet metal. I've used this in order to dimple thin sheet stock if you have to dimple, but sometimes it's better anything else that you need to know? Well, one of the first innovations for blind rivets that was used in aircraft was this, the explosive rivet. And I'll detonate one of these in the shop for you on Wednesday as well. It's got the report of about like a 22 when it goes off, so it's a little loud. But the idea is you've got an explosive charge that's in the shank of the rivet. When you heat the head of the rivet, what happens is the explosive charge detonates in the shank and forms a very slight shock head on the other side of it. And again, that's pretty much how it works. These were developed, or at least developed in Germany during the war years in 1936. DuPont bought the patent during the war years. So when old timers talk about DuPont rivets, what they're talking about are explosive rivets. And again, many of the old timers they'll talk about DuPont rivets. Well, they're being explosive rivets. There were a couple different varieties of them. Some of them had an explosive shank or portion of the shank of it, and others had a drive pin. When you drove the pin into the charge of the powder, what it did is it exploded. The others just use heat directly in order to actually fire the explosive charge. Yeah, there are, but they're never usually printed on them. These things are considered to be obsolete today for a couple of reasons. One reason is that they're considered to be hazardous to use around flammable materials. When aircraft were in construction, no problem in using them because usually they were used like in wing structure before the aircraft was even completely assembled. But for repair work, I would be really careful about them. There's another reason too you have to be careful with them as well. The debris that's given off from that explosive charge is corrosive. So it can embed itself in aluminum and it can cause corrosion of the aluminum. So you've got somewhat of a fire hazard and an explosion hazard, and it's somewhat corrosive, the byproducts of the combustion process. So again, they're not too commonly found today. But if you want to see what they're like, I'll detonate one in the shop to see what they're like. This is I think I've got a small video that kind of shows the use of explosive rivets. I may have shown this to you earlier. But again, during the war years, they came up with a lot of different expedient methods of assembly. This was one way that we can assemble aircraft kind of quickly. I can't imagine what it would be like in a shop with a lot of these things going off. But apparently that's what happened. So anyway, that's it. That would be an explosive rivet.
Is the explosive rivet. These tiny metal stitches are used only on blind surfaces where pressure cannot be brought to bear from both sides. Each rivet carries a small powder charge which is set off by a heated electric tool. Note how the rivets swell after they explode. Under the pressure of the speeded up.
Okay, so you get the idea? All right. I've got an old set that came from World War II. A lot of the rivets that are in that box that we have, they're duds. They should detonate maybe about a second or two after application of heat, but you could probably lay on them all day with a soldering iron and they won't go off. So again, a lot of them have been sitting around for 70 years in the box, probably waterlogged to the point where they won't fire. When you do find them on eBay, the sellers of these things usually try to disguise the name of them because eBay will pull the auction if they see the word explosive used in the title of it. So people that sell them will usually talk about them being chemically expanded, but really what they are is they're explosive rivets. What I want you to remember about those rivets, they're color-coded for a reason. They're anodized aluminum. The color code tells you the grip range that would be appropriate for their use. Obviously, they can't be cut to figure out what thicknesses of metal you wish to assemble. That would give you the grip of the overall thickness of material. And then there's a chart that you use to kind of figure out what rivet is used. The way that they identify the grip ranges of the rivets is by color coding the rivets. So if I ask you on a test next week how they select these blank rivets for installation based on grip, they're anodized with a specific color to tell you what length is required based on their grip. Okay, that's how they do it. So these would be they're anodized red. I'll show you a chart later. If you can read on the box itself, the grip range for this particular rivet goes from 066 to 085. Anything thicker or anything thinner is not going to work for being able to hold the materials together. You need to have the shop head beyond the material where it's being formed. By the same token, the rivet has got to be long enough so that it doesn't bulge inside of the material itself. The rivet shank has got to bulge on the outside. So that's how they select the grip of the rivet. It's based on color coding that they use for on the surface of the rivet that's been anodized.
What's the drill size on that? It says.
What's the what?
It says drill size on there too.
That's the important point as well. In order to adequately install these things, the drill sizing is critical. If you oversize the hole, there's almost no amount of expansion. At best, these things expand about 1/1000th of an inch. So again, if you misdrill the hole and you oblong the hole or it's oversized, I guarantee you that the rivet will be loose in the hole. So you have to be very careful when you install them. Okay, so that's what they are. They should detonate in about 1.5 to 6 seconds, but again, a lot of them, they're duds. By the time that they've been left in the box for 70 years or so, forget it. They're waterlogged. Okay. The heating element, a lot of the kits that you see sometimes that are offered for sale, the heating element tip is many of the early ones made out of pure silver. So you can imagine that they're probably long gone by now. People have robbed the tips off of the heating elements. In a pinch, you could probably use a soldering iron, but I wouldn't recommend it. You don't have enough downward pressure by a soldering iron to kind of get the rivet to stay in the hole. So, but anyway, the older tips are made out of silver. And this is, I won't ask you about this, but you should know it. For installing the different diameters of these rivets, you have to have pilot drills and also ream size or finish drills for installation. For example, if you're installing the 1/8" diameter versions of the exploding rivet, you first have to pilot drill the hole with a number 31 drill, and then you have to finish ream it with a number 29. That will give you the ideal size so that the rivet will have a proper amount of expansion in the hole. Similarly, if you're installing a 3/16 diameter rivet, you have to use a number 12 pilot drill, and then you have to finish with a number 6. If the hole has been, again, oblong or oversized, I guarantee you it won't swell or fill the hole. So it's important. Remember what I told you too, the way that we size the shank of the rivet is by the anodizing color code that rivet has. So I'll show you the chart in a little bit, but anyway, that's how they do it. Here's an example of the part numbers, or at least for these old DuPont rivets, but this one is color coded black, and it's for a grip range of 045 to 064. And this one down at the bottom would be for a grip of 085 through 104. And it's blue. Here's the chart, and this one is for brazier head rivets. By the way, these rivets are so old, you have to develop the universal head. So, again, 1944 or so, they were a long way off from standardizing head profiles on rivets. So, any of the protruding head rivets generally were brazier head. Any of the countersunk rivets were, I think they were 100 degree or 120. But this is what you have. So you can see the color coding that they use on the side of it corresponds with the minimum and maximum grip ranges that you use for those rivets. So that's why they color code the rivets. Okay. This is the kit that they use to install them with. And again, it looks like a Buck Rogers ray gun. It's really big. The heating element stays hot for quite a while. You can burn yourself with these things. You have to be kind of careful. But there's a different tip design for every different head size that's used. We've only got one that's in the kit, and that's what I seem to be able to get away with. But that's what the kit looks like when it's opened up for the heating gun, heating element. Okay. Okay, let's talk about more modern types of line rivets for aircraft. For aircraft, what we have are essentially three different varieties of blind rivets that are used today for aircraft construction. We have a rivet that is somewhat like a pop rivet, but we don't call it a pop rivet. We call it a pull-through rivet. If you want to get information on that rivet, I can reference you to the old General Handbook on page 156 of the handbook. They talk about this rivet. The installation of that rivet is in the airframe book on page 184. It essentially gives you a hollow shank after you're done. And these rivets are almost like pop rivets in the sense that they don't really take any structural load. Since the shank is hollow, when you pull the mandrel through the rivet shank, it leaves you with a hollow rivet. So there's no shear strength that you can find in that rivet. So even though the material might be compatible with the structure, the problem is you've got pretty much just a hole in the center of that rivet, so there's no shear strength. There was another type of rivet that was developed later on that was a little bit better, that is in fact used for some structural applications in aircraft, and it's called a friction lock rivet. The difference is that when the mandrel is pulled through the shank of the rivet, a brake notch is present on the mandrel, and then what holds that mandrel in place inside of the shank is actually friction. So there's a brake notch here. When you begin to pull on the rivet shank, ultimately what happens is the mandrel fractures at this point. The rest of the mandrel is gone. It's actually extracted, but you have just friction holding the rest of the mandrel in place. We call that a self-plugging friction lock rivet. A lot of the earliest Cherry rivets made by Cherry Manufacturing Company were the friction lock design. And again, for structural loads, okay. The problem is you have to concern yourself with those vibrations. When the aircraft is in flight and there's vibrating loads, again, there's some potential that mandrel can come out because the only thing that's holding it in is what? Friction. That's it. Okay. So if you want to get more information on their installation, you can look in the 15 Alpha if you want to see them talk about them. In the 9 Alpha, there's some literature that kind of discusses them. The next iteration of rivets that came along were better. This is what's termed a self-plugging mechanically locked rivet. Not only does it have a mandrel that's pulled through the shank of the rivet, it's got a locking collar that, during the pulling process, is actually securing the rest of the mandrel of the stem in place. So a lot of the manufacturers, when you talk about Cherry lock rivets or Olympic lock rivets, what they're talking about is a rivet that has a locking collar that's inserted into a grooved area around the head of the rivet, and rather than just having friction holding the stem in place inside of the shank of the rivet, you've now got that locking collar. Cherry Max rivets are a further innovation of this type of rivet. They're mechanically locked. Other manufacturers also make rivets that are equivalent to. So if we talk about Huck or Olympic or other manufacturers, they have varieties of mechanically locked rivets that work pretty much the same way. What I will tell you too is when Cherry Max first were developed, that was pretty much the first mechanically locked blind rivet that really worked well. Other manufacturers had to wait because Cherry had the patent on that particular type of rivet. And then when the patent ran out, then other manufacturers were able to copy that rivet design. But I'll show you some of the rivets that makes Cherry rivet kind of work a little bit, or makes Cherry Max rivets work. But any type of locking rivet, generically, will have a locking collar that holds the collar or holds the rivet's shank in place or the stem in place. There's this kind of chart shows you the usage of blind fasteners. Beginning about 1970, aircraft manufacturers had to find kind of a better method of assembly that speeded production and made assembly a lot easier. So you can see from about 1970 on, the sales, in this case of Textron blind fasteners, which would be a subsidiary that is Cherry, kind of grew. Textron also some of the subsidiary companies of Textron were Lycoming Engine at the time, and also Bell Helicopter. Interestingly enough, if you take a look at all of those companies, they share some of their products. If you look at Bell Helicopter, a lot of the Textron products, they use Cherry rivets in those assemblies. They use the sister company's products in their aircraft. So again, there's a lot of synergism with the manufacture of different products and within the same or the same corporation. So in any event, you can see that they've kind of grown. But the Cherry Max rivet was pretty much the big innovating feature with a lot of them. To kind of recap, pull-through rivets, they're a lot like regular pop rivets. You're left with pretty much a blind rivet, but the shank is hollow after you pull them. If you look at the friction lock rivets when they're installed, the friction lock rivets just differ a little bit. They just have the mandrel that's held in by friction when they're installed. And again, you have to be wary of those because, again, friction can cause the mandrel to be lost over time. So that's it. And I want to expose you to the answer to an FA test question you may see on a test regarding the selection of the rivet length. If you don't have a grip gauge to actually measure the length of the particular rivet. There's a rule of thumb regarding friction lock rivets, and for the most part, it will also work for the mechanically locked rivets. But you'll notice that they've got the dimension that's labeled as B. This would be the projection of the rivet shank beyond the material. The general guideline for installing these friction lock rivets is they have about 3/64 of an inch to about 1/8 of an inch of rivet shank extending beyond the material. This is not the ideal way to figure out what length of rivet you need. The best way is to use a proprietary grip gauge that goes down into the hole where we can take a reading from the scale and figure out what length we need. But as a ballpark and estimate of figuring out how much rivet shank should extend, well, about 3/64 to about 1/8 of an inch or so, and that will kind of catch you there. So that's for determining length. Okay. So that's good. The question always comes up, how do you remove some of these fasteners? Well, you have to use kind of the same guidance that we give you for removing any type of regular rivet. The object of the game is not to damage what? The hole. That's right, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to install the same diameter of rivet in the hole. So with the friction lock rivets, the first thing that you're going to have to do in removal is drive the locking, the friction lock mandrel out of the hole, out of the rivet shank. So you can use a regular pin punch in order to do that. Then they drill to remove the head. They just weaken the head with a large diameter drill. They pry the head off, and then they tap the rest of the shank out with a grip. Now, showing you the picture and actually doing it are kind of two different things. When you're working in very thin material, it's really easy to dent the material. So you have to have adequate support when you do this. And again, you kind of have to be careful. And I can't tell you how to be careful. You have to find out for yourself. But again, you have to use a little bit of caution when you remove these rivets. That's how the friction lock rivets come out. You should also be aware, too, when these blind rivets were developed, originally they came out with stems that looked like this. They had kind of a knob end on the end of them. Guess what? The manufacturers that made those rivets had a special pulling tool that kind of went around that mandrel in order to grab and pull it. Well, they were all sized based on a particular diameter of rivet. So if you wanted to pull a different diameter, you had to have a different pulling head on the puller in order to be able to grab onto that knob stem. Later on, what they did, most of the manufacturers adopted a serrated stem. So they have a puller that will just grab onto the serrations, and it makes it a lot easier to pull. But before that, they all had knob stems on them, and again, you had to have a special pulling tool in order to pull the rivet. Once in a while on eBay, you'll see a great deal on friction lock rivets, but they've all got that head style, or at least that type of mandrel on them. So again, unless you intend to buy also the pulling head to kind of pull them, you won't be able to with a standard top rivet gun. The Cherry came out with their first versions of mechanically locked rivets. They came out with a bold Cherry lock before they came out with the Cherry Max, and this was good for both thick and thin skins. But the idea is when you put the pulling tool on top of the rivet, you clamp the material together. If there's any type of gap in the material, you continue to pull until ultimately the bolts start to form on the shop head or the shop head side of where the rivet is at. then the locking collar is inserted into the grooved area on the top of the mandrel, and then eventually the brake notch allows the portion of the pulling mandrel to be broken away. But that's what you're left with for a conventional cherry lock rivet. Olympic works the same way. On materials that have a lot of gap between the sheets, Cherry then came up with a different variety of these mechanically locked rivets that allows for a lot of take-up. So sometimes aircraft manufacturers, they didn't use Clecos all that much, and they found that there were big gaps between the material. With other versions of blind rivets, sometimes it would cause premature, the collar to prematurely set or not set in the grooved area. So they had to come up with a different variety of these mechanically locked rivets, so they came up with this. This is a wire draw version of the rivet. And again, for big take-up, again, it was suited for that type of work. Then later on, Cherry came up with this, and it's called a Cherry Max rivet. The big difference in it is, it doesn't matter if you've got thick or thin skins you want to assemble, there's adequate take-up, but most importantly, you can get away with one pulling head for all the different diameters of rivets that they make for it. That what made that possible is this that's on the rivet. It's a driving anvil. It looks like a washer. So when you put the gun on top of the rivet and start to pull, what you're bearing against is this driving anvil. And what that does is it ensures that that locking collar is going to seat at the correct time interval in the pulling of the rivet. Other versions of rivets don't have that feature. This was one of the big innovations that Cherry came up with. And again, once again, the Cherry patent ran out on this. Other manufacturers copied it. So Huck copied the design, Olympic copied the design. So now we have Huck lock, an Olympic lock, and all the others that kind of mimic this particular feature. It is a mechanically locked rivet, so that locking collar does in fact lock until locking grooves as you pull it. There's also a locking ring that's at the bottom of the rivet that moves in the process of pulling it. So it gives you a lot of variation in being able to assemble thick and thin materials because it sizes itself during the installation. Pretty good design, interesting design. But anyway, it's probably the top of the line in